Brand new report is giving more fuel to Republicans investigating former President Biden's decline in office. According to Axios, top White House aides repeatedly questioned a stack of controversial pardons granted in the final months of his presidency. One source said, quote, there was a mad dash to find groups of people that he could then pardon, and then they largely didn't run it by the Justice Department to vet them. House Oversight Chairman James Comer told Fox News as President Biden declined, his aides carried out executive actions without his approval, casting doubt on the legitimacy of thousands of pardons and other executive actions. 12 members of Biden's inner circle have testified in the House probe so far. 2 more interviews are scheduled for later this month. You know, Kennedy, I want to start here with a quote from the staff secretary that came out in email. The staff secretary controls the paper flow in the White House. It's kind of unimaginable that he would pen an email like this. This is Steph Feldman, When did we get Biden's approval of this? Speaking of the pardons, I'm going to need email from Rosa Poe on original chain confirming Biden signs off on the specific documents when they are ready. I cannot imagine Derek Lyons, our staff secretary at the time, saying, has the president signed off on these executive actions flowing through the White House?
Well, it just goes to show you a couple of different things. Within the Biden inner circle, there are very few people who were actually invited to the campfire. So very few people had access to the president. So even people who normally, and you can attest to this, having been in that sanctum, you know, normally there are people who can go in and out and ask the president questions or at least have access to the chief of staff, and others who can confirm that, yes, the president has had eyeballs on this and approves of all of these. But there were so many people who were pretty high up in the chain who could not get confirmation on that. So I think, you know, what we really have to do at this point, and I don't have a problem with former President Biden sitting down and having someone, you know, go over a list of some of the controversial pardons and ask him, why would you approve this? And if he has an answer for that, that's fine. Keep the system in place. Otherwise, you take the pardons that were signed by the auto pen, and they are ripe for scrutiny. And they should be scrutinized because this is a presidential pardon. This is not a group pardon or a committee pardon or someone who has strong feelings about something that they can issue the pardon. This is from the President of the United States and has to be defended by that thusly.
You know, Cheryl, we were in the West Wing there with that email, but let's move to the Department of Justice. So this is separate. You have the staff sec questioning what's happening. And then at DOJ, you have the ethics attorney who says this. One other important note, this was after Biden pardoned some nonviolent offenders. That's how he described them. In communication about the commutations, the White House has described those who receive commutations as people convicted of nonviolent drug offenses. I think you should stop saying that because it's untrue or at least misleading. One pardon or clemency he flagged was this one. Adrian Peeler, accused of killing an 8-year-old boy and his mother. He shot the 8-year-old boy in the head as he attempted to crawl away.
Another one of the pardons was a cop killer,
yep,
to be clear. And Jonathan Fahey, a frequent guest, he was on Newsroom this morning. He actually represented some of the families that were up in arms when they found out about these pardons. And they reached out to the White House. They reached out to the DOJ. They said, you cannot let these people out. And these are the victims' families. And they were ignored by the White House, he told me, and ghosted. That is this Biden White House. I can't wait to see what Jeff Zients has to say. He's probably going to plead the fifth, but maybe. Karine Jean-Pierre, what does she have to say? They're still coming.
She's writing a book.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you plead the fifth? Probably so, and that's the disappointing part. But do you not understand the real-world implications and the pain that you've caused some of these families for who you let off the hook at the 11th hour?
Yeah, the question is why? Like what do you get out of pardoning these people with these heinous crimes? Jeremy, I didn't realize this until today, and I read this in an article. There was actually a 2021 memo penned by the incoming staff secretary that cited precedent from the Obama administration that the original signature of the president should be on pardons. So they had guidance that he needs to sign these, so why didn't he?
Wow. I mean, even from their own party, you see that report coming out. I mean, to me, even from a national security perspective, I'm saying we had a commander-in-chief who was seemingly allowing his staff to use an auto pen, saying that they were operating as president or as, you know, commander-in-chief. I think about all the things that were going on during this time. We had the collapse in Afghanistan. We had the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have the rise of China and the influence of China, which, by the way, is even on our own soil. A lot of Chinese companies, you know, operating in the federal government. As you see this all the time. And so my question is, how do we have someone who was supposed to be commander-in-chief, but had seemingly, I mean, it looks to me, had delegated that somehow to low-level staffers, not even necessarily senior staffers. Some of these are aides to staffers who are making these decisions with an auto pen instead of the authority of the president.
Yeah, I need the background of all the people who made these decisions. I need to know if there was any sort of a group organized to make these decisions for the president, what their bona fides were, and also what their directive was and who was giving that directive. I mean, those are the questions that I would ask both Zients and Jean-Pierre. You know, she would have been in communications, I would think, privy to the information of what the rules would have been for this, and Zients would have known the resumes of the people who were putting forth these pardons and probably other things. We don't know. If it weren't for this investigation, we wouldn't know what we know right now. But I think that one graphic from Pew Research laid it all out. It took 3 terms for FDR to get to 3,796 pardons. Biden, 4,245. Trump, what was it, like 328, I think. I can't see that graphic in front of me now, but it was far less than that. So you had Obama and Biden in 2 terms doing so much more than 4 other presidents. Why is that? What are the rules, and who's in charge of making them, and who followed them?
Yeah, one of the individuals killed a 2-year-old. So why? Why did you do it? It's a huge question. Hopefully we'll find answers.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.